The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
As always, we endeavor on this show to bring you the top leaders who make the rules which we citizens live by. We have been very fortunate over the past 10 years of this show to bring you presidential candidates, governors, U.S. senators, and congressmen, as well as top leaders in state government. In continuation of that trend, there is no one higher up in the food chain than the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives in Congress. That person is Kevin Owen McCarthy, the 55th Speaker of the House of Representatives for the United States. Mr. McCarthy is from Bakersfield, California. He attended California State University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Marketing, and then continued on with his education, receiving a Master's in Business Administration, or an MBA. During college, he served as a seasonal firefighter for the Kern County Fire Department in California. His first elective office he served in was as a state representative in the California General Assembly. He was then elected to the United States Congress in 2006 and has had a meteoric rise. In his second term, he joined leadership in Congress as the Chief Deputy Whip. When Republicans took control of the House in 2011, he was elevated to Majority Whip. After the Republicans lost the House in 2018, McCarthy was elected as the Republican leader, succeeding former Speaker Paul Ryan. McCarthy led Republicans back into the majority in 2022 midterms and went on to be elected Speaker of the 118th Congress. Today, we will discuss with the Speaker his dealings with President Joe Biden, who he met with privately at the deadline to raise the debt ceiling, and the two respective leaders of their parties collaborated on a bill that raised the debt ceiling for 2 years, averting a national and worldwide economic catastrophe. We will also discuss the Freedom Caucus's blocking legislation on the House Rules Committee, as well as the work of some of the investigative committees now that the Republicans have a majority.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Mr. Speaker, welcome to the Volpe Report, and thank you on behalf of the people in Northeast and Central Pennsylvania for making time in what we all know is a very busy schedule. Second most powerful man in government, as you got to show the country when you dealt directly with the president in the debt ceiling negotiations. But thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, and it's an honor to be with you. I've been a big admirer of the report, but I've been to this area quite often. Dan Muser has me up a few times, and I really, to all your viewers and listeners, I thank them for the work they do. To me, I'm very impressed of what happens in Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you. And I know I can attest, having met you personally on some of those visits. You've had quite a year, Speaker, for the last half of 2022, trying to get a majority. You traveled the country. Those were some of the visits I met you on. Yes. And that was, you were in Pennsylvania one day and you were in Montana the next and then Texas. And when you finally took your track shoes off and you win a contested vote for speakership, which you prevailed on, as everybody expected, and then you walked right into what's going on in our country. And we're going to talk about some of that. The fact that you now, as Republicans, have the majority, the things Americans are finding out in your subcommittees and committees with subpoena power, calling in members of the Biden cabinet, has been revelatory. I don't even know where to start on Secretary Mayorkas and his performance. I was amazed and dumbfounded with Secretary Deborah Haaland's performance, who apparently didn't know much about what the Department of the Interior does and the energy fallout in the country that we're facing. So you've had a lot. So kind of overview the 6 months you've had as Speaker.
Well, as many of you know, most people who run for Speaker get elected on the first round. I happen to be Irish, so I like to go 15 rounds. So it turned out well. But I hope everybody realized from that point is I will never give up on them. And one thing that I would walk and listen to a lot of people in Pennsylvania, especially when we rolled out the Commitment to America, We actually did it in Pennsylvania. And in there, we made a lot of commitments, having listened to what we would achieve. And it gave us a roadmap to do exactly what we said we would start doing. I mean, think for one moment. We wanted to make sure the pandemic was over. The president said he wouldn't sign that bill. We got that bill signed. We've now got the information about where this virus actually started. Look at what we're finding today, and it's only with our investigations becoming the majority that we find, funding from America actually provided some of this inside China, and it started in the Wuhan lab, which the government wouldn't tell us. We first started out making sure, trying to pull back those 87,000 IRS agents. We stopped them from hiring anybody, the $1.4 billion they're going to use this year to hire anybody, and the $20 billion going into the future. And we got to keep fighting to make that happen. We want to become energy independent, which is very important for Pennsylvania, but to America and to not just our energy, but our clean air. To be able to cut the red tape so we can build things again, not just roads, but pipelines and others, to get that NEPA reform that hasn't happened in 40 years. But we passed H.R. 1, our energy independence bill. We looked at parents who want to say in their kids' education, a parent's bill of rights. We were able to pass that as well. We've looked at making sure our streets are safe. We stopped D.C. from decriminalizing these criminal-friendly bills that are going through. The Democrats voted against it. The president said he'd veto it. And lo and behold, the American people spoke and he signed it. We're watching just be able to stop this wasteful Washington spending. We can't stop it all, but we've made a real dent to begin with to spend less than we spent last year, to get work requirements in for those who are able-bodied with no dependents, be able to put in those 20 hours for welfare and get that welfare reform working to help these people get jobs again. I mean, I think we're off to a really strong start with a lot of people didn't give us credit to do it.
The permitting process, where one lead agency will now, on all environmental issues, kind of be responsible, which will exempt more projects, apparently. And there's a deadline that will be created for agency action on such reviews. So the progressive Democrats and the Biden administration has held up through the regulatory deep state we all talk about and know is there. Well, that's a major achievement and concession that was done to speed up that process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Look, we haven't been able to have reform, and this is called NEPA, in 40 years. And we all know the stories where you watch from the state or anybody else, they plan to build a new road and it's expanding, but it takes 7 years of study and you're thinking, why? It costs more, you're wasting. We streamline this now, going into one agency. We streamline and put the focus. How long could you actually do a review study? You've got 1 to 2 years now. So we've really shrunk our ability to, because America needs to compete. And the only way we're going to be able to compete is to have a level playing field where we can cut the red tape. So this is a pretty good reform that we got in a short amount of time, but we're even going to build more on this permitting reform. So we can cut all that red tape and build things in America again to be able to compete. Now, another thing that happens here too for Pennsylvania, you've got the ability to produce a lot of natural gas. And that benefits America and benefits the world. If we just took American natural gas and replaced Russian natural gas just for 1 year in Europe, we would save 218 million tons of CO2 emissions. Could you imagine that? But also, how many more jobs would we create? But we've watched the NEPA and the environmental reviews to hold up any new pipelines, which make it a safer transmission as well. This is going to streamline what's held us back and be able to build in America again across this nation.
Well, again, on that debt ceiling resolution and bill that passed and saved the country and the world from financial catastrophe, a pipeline through West Virginia was, I believe, a specific, also a concession that was achieved. So to your point.
They've been trying to stop this for quite some time, but you got to understand what this pipeline has gone through. It's gone up to the Supreme Court 3 times and has won. 92% of it is already done. So why would we continue to use really erroneous rules to try to stop it? So we were able to put it into the bill and get it finished up to make America stronger in the process. And it goes through a number of states, not just West Virginia, but Ohio and others.
Mr. Speaker, months ago, I had former Governor Christie on this show from New Jersey. He was telling horror stories in New Jersey and New York on interstates, Russian tankers on United States interstates with Russian oil and natural gas because they've shut down all Marcellus Shale drilling in New York. And they have oceans of it, kind of like Pennsylvania. It's amazing that at a time our president then is out begging from some of our enemies for oil that he shut down in the first place. One of his first acts as president, right, was to shut down the Keystone XL pipeline. You know, yes. The gas. Then now he's begging Canada for their gas and oil. Here's another thing that doesn't get enough attention, but I think was important. The Government Accountability Office, you got language that they're now going to track all regulation and trigger a vote in Congress whenever an agency creates new regulatory costs without reducing existing costs. It's another thing, another major gain in terms of pulling back on the regulatory state that we live in.
Yeah, and we watch this. What we did, we just passed this week, REINS Act. What we put in the debt ceiling we call PAYGO, where we took a executive order that Trump had put in that President Biden put out, which would kind of keep in track of what the executive branch would try to do. If they want to add new regulation, if they want to spend money going around Congress, which I believe is unconstitutional, and it scores more than $100 million in a year, you can't do it. You got to cut somewhere else to save the American taxpayer money, to cut the wasteful Washington spending. We were able to get that in. I want to strengthen how we do it because the OMB can have a little waiver there. So when we go through approach, make it even stronger. But we've actually protected us because since Biden's been in office, he has spent $1.5 trillion going around Congress and Senate. And that's wrong from all aspects, but he's added all this new regulation that's cost us and created inflation. Remember, one of the greatest economists of our time, Milton Friedman, said there's only one place that inflation is created, through government. They added, when the Democrats were in power, $6 trillion in spending. Well, that made everything cost more. Then they went in and would pay people to stay home. So it hurt our supply chain. So when you look what we really did in the debt ceiling overall, for the first time, we're spending less money than we spent before. It cuts more than $2 trillion, the largest cut in American history. It put work requirements to get people back to work on welfare. That helps our supply chain. It helps curb inflation with our spending. We've got NEPA reform, environmental review reform, timelines. That cuts red tape to help us start building things fast and lowering our energy costs. And then another thing that we did, we're able to stop this year from their beginning of hiring any new IRS agents to go after and looking at it. Just, the IRS should be there to help us, not just to go after the American public. And so there's a number of things in this bill that Democrats said were red lines that they wouldn't even meet with us. They just wanted you to spend more money. And so we've been able to turn the tide a little bit here. It's like turning a ship. It takes a long time to do it, but we've really started the process.
No question. I think the total numbers are estimated in cost-cutting saving that you achieved in this compromise between $1 and $1.5 trillion, so with the T. Usually I tell our viewers with the B when I'm referring to a billion. It's rare I get to say with the T. And I think as an overview of this whole subject, because obviously the press, a lot of the mainstream press tends to be left. That's just what it is. But, if you had any doubts about your performance, I was kind of intrigued. I'm a voracious reader, Mr. Speaker, including the New York Times, which hasn't always been your biggest fan. But I read a recent editorial, and this was their editorial opinion analysis. I'm going to just give you some of the highlights of what they said. When the debt limit fight began, it was widely assumed that Speaker Kevin McCarthy, untested and inexperienced in high-stakes negotiations, would either preside over an economically, politically calamitous government default or lose his hard-won post. In the end, he delivered an agreement that met his goal of cutting spending from current levels. The debt limit package he personally negotiated with President Biden, Mr. McCarthy defied expectations and even earned grudging respect from White House officials while defusing the debt time limit bomb. His allies gave him credit for taking on the White House and Senate Democrats and emerging with a positive result when most Democrats were counting on him to fail. And finally, administration officials conceded that he proved to be a stronger adversary in negotiations than many of them were expecting. If the New York Times says that about you, it must be true. They don't say too many nice things about Republican speakers of the House.
No, they don't. And I'm sure the next day they didn't either. I'll take the one day. You know what? I'd never heard that nor read it because I don't read the Times because I know what they usually write.
Yeah, and I fully understood. That's why I thought that I would read it for you. So at least there is that. Turning our attention now to some more current issues, Mr. Speaker. There obviously, as I said, we will have to discuss the Freedom Caucus. That tend to be farther right conservatives have some pretty strong views, and they were something, I'll say, a hurdle to overcome in the debt ceiling concessions you received. They are now putting up some resistance through the House Rules Committee and the ability to move legislation. So kind of give us an overview. I will point out this as we talked off camera. Again, this is not new. Speaker John Boehner dealt with it. Speaker Paul Ryan dealt with it. And as you and I talked off camera, Speaker Democrat Nancy Pelosi, with a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, they couldn't get the infrastructure bill that was a showcase of the Biden legislative agenda for 9 months because the squad, the far left group in the Democratic House, blocked everything. So every speaker deals with this. So kind of talk about where we're at with all that.
If you watch the speaker's race, I dealt with it there. The way I look at it is we have a 5-seat majority. But, you know, I've been leader for 4 years. In those 4 years, we've just gained seats. We haven't lost. We've elected more women, more minority Republicans. We won 5 seats more in California, 5 seats more in New York. We won in Oregon. We won in Arizona, places that the Republicans were losing. We lost the White House. 2 cycles, they lost in the Senate, they lost governors, they lost legislature. The quality of the candidates that we have are much superior than others. But we also come from a makeup of a microcosm of America, right? We're representing seats that Biden won by 10 or 13 points. And so how do you bring everybody together? I think everybody wants to be able to have their voice heard, and that's right. I think everybody wants to keep their principles. So what you need to do is really put everybody in the room. And people are going to have to give and take, but still keep their principles. We can get there. We've proven it on border security, which when we had 30-seat majorities, we couldn't pass. We have a 5-seat majority. We did it with our debt ceiling battle. If you look at the debt ceiling vote at the end of the day, historically, anytime Republicans have a debt ceiling and they have a Democratic president, only 24% for it, 2/3. So it really showed that Republicans won in this nature. I think we just find people are strong on their beliefs, and that's rightfully so. People are representing their district, but the districts are different everywhere. So how do you keep people together? And I bring everybody into the table. They come from different walks of life, and everybody is respected. And some fight harder than others, but at the end of the day, I will tell you that people have found a place that we can come together. That doesn't mean it's always going to be smooth. But you know what? In a democracy, I don't want everybody thinking the exact same thing. I don't want a speaker that just says it's this way or no way. I want America to have a voice. And when I became speaker, I wanted to open up the people's house again, where the people could come in here. No longer are bills 1,000 pages. This bill is 99 pages, right?
That's right.
No longer is it voted on the middle of the night. No one gets to see it. 72 hours. Not only did members get to see it, America got to read it. So they knew exactly what's in it. That creates better policy and a better future for America. So yeah, there's going to be tugs on each direction. There'll be tugs from members who are not as conservative as the Freedom Caucus, think they're going too far. My job is to keep people together, keep everybody in the room, let them have their say in others, but steer us into a place where we can all get to keep our focus on the American public. Because if we do nothing, it's a failure. So it's hard sometimes. I don't do this job because it's easy. And if I was worried about having challenges in this job, I wouldn't sign up for it. But I look at it like this. I view it as opportunities every day. Yeah, one week they want to shut down the rules. Well, that's an opportunity to get people back together and get them all working again. It's not on a timeline. It's making sure you get a better bill.
Let's turn our attention now to what we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of some of the committees and what's being uncovered. One of the great hypocrisies right now that I think we're dealing with is we've just had a former president indicted on 37 federal counts, former President Trump. He had already been indicted for things in New York on state charges. And at the same time, the press and the media will not talk about the investigations of Hunter Biden and the president. They won't talk about the dysfunction at the border and some of that. Now, your committees are actually finding evidence for the American people. So would you go through a little bit about some of what those committees have uncovered, some of the talking points?
One of our pillars in the commitment to America was bring accountability back in government. And so one of the ways to do that, becoming Speaker, we had our committees not just stay in Washington, but go out to the American public. And how are you going to know about the border if you're having a hearing in D.C. with what's happening on the border? So a number of our committees went down to the border to get all the information before we crafted our bill of securing the border. Right now, we're walking through Chairman Mayorkas on a 5-point plan on what he has done down there to really hold him accountable of what's happening and have him come before us. But you raised an interesting point. And one thing I hear from the American public, they believe in equal justice. Supreme Court's just across the way from the Capitol. They have Lady Justice there. She wears a blindfold that has a scale that's supposed to be equal. You raise a good point from looking at former First Lady, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on what was she ever tried or indicted when she had a server that had classified information and she purchased software to bleach it and it used hammers to break it. You've got a sitting president that has classified documents in a garage behind a Corvette that dates all the way back when he's a senator. And this is something your viewers should understand. I have the privilege of being in the Gang of Eight by being the Speaker of the House, and I've been in it as the minority leader as well. If you're a member of the House or Senate and you're given a classified document, you're only provided for that inside a secure SCIF. At no time can you ever take that document out. So at no time should a senator or a congressional member ever have a classified document. If you do, you have stolen that document. It's very clear, black and white. These classified documents we're finding out the current president has dates back to when he was a senator. Where is the investigation? Has any press even raised that question? But why is one person treated one way and another treated the other? The current president has these classified documents for years and had been out of office for a long time. President Trump has only been out for a couple of years. The Presidential Records Act doesn't have a timeline when they come back. They're supposed to go through. And this is a frustration. It also goes to a different question. Is a current administration using their Justice Department to attack their number one candidate in the future? President Trump's leading in the polls. That raises a question or issue. And then what we have been able to acquire and know through our Oversight Committee and our Judiciary Committee, I was able to create something called the Weaponization Committee. This is to look at the weaponization of government itself to be used in a wrong way. How can we stand up and stop it? Jim Jordan runs this. And in there, we had found a week before interviewing the former head of the Washington district office from the FBI. He raised questions about the raid on Mar-a-Lago. He said they shouldn't raid it. They should call the attorney. Jack Smith said, no, we need to raid it. He said, well, if we go down there, we should just go down there FBI and then stop and call the attorneys and have them bring it over. No, that's the way they handled Biden later, but they didn't handle President Trump. Unequal. We have now found from whistleblowers coming to us, not just about the Wuhan lab and what Dr. Fauci knew, we're finally getting that to come forward. But we also have from whistleblowers saying that foreign money has come in to President Biden. We don't know if that's true or not, but they had brought it forward. We asked the FBI, do they have these documents? It's been given this years ago. They wouldn't provide to us. We've been able to subpoena it. I had to threaten contempt, but we now have that document where Republicans and Democrats on the committee could both read it. And lo and behold, it does make that accusation that this money came through and then it would be gone to shell companies and paid down to the Biden family. Well, now because we've been able to look at suspicious activities from banks on the Biden family, we now know the company they have doesn't make anything, doesn't own any real estate, but does have shell companies that actually pay daughter-in-laws, grandchildren. I mean, this raises real concerns. So we're following this wherever the information takes us, but they're fighting us by providing this information to the American public. The president can really go, if he says there's nothing there, roll out and show us there's nothing. Don't have the American public continue to question and wonder this.
Well, one of the things, the American people, Mr. Speaker, as you're well aware, in every poll I've seen, is at record low in terms of trust of the media, because they were not told the whole truth for several years about what was happening in the country. Well, and that's dangerous in a free country, in a democratic republic. Secondarily, now we're going down another black hole, dark alley of equal justice. And we're talking to your point. Let's look back a few short years ago with the Steele dossier, when they tried to ruin the first half of the Trump administration with criminal investigations, that there was collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign to subvert the election in 2016, all of which turned out to be a fiction and created from the Hillary Clinton camp. So we now are in that dangerous, third world country or the old USSR, where you jail and you weaponize your Justice Department to take out your political enemies. I can't believe we're having this conversation in America.
That's why we created the weaponization committee run by Jim Jordan to make sure we stop all that. But you raise another good point. Think of this. Before the presidential election, the now Secretary of State Blinken went and reached out to 52 people, some former CIA directors and others, to sign a letter and say that laptop, which they now acknowledge is Hunter Biden's laptop, they said it wasn't. They said it was a Russian collusion making all this information up. But you raise a good point about the media. CNN has Clapper as a paid individual who was one of those 51 who used their name to lie to the American public. Now we're finding out CNN has hired former disgraced FBI agent Andrew McCabe as a commentator. He was fired when he weaponized government, and now the media hires him. And who do they put on to give commentation and talk about President Trump being indicted? This man was disgraced and fired, and then CNN hires him for how he handled classified documents. That's what's disturbing to me as the American public. And I called this out to CNN this week because I wanted them to ask, why do you keep this man on air? With what he said was a lie, he got fired by the FBI, and now you're going to put him on air to give his opinion about indictments? That's wrong.
Well, that's why there's down at 20-some% believe what they're being told by national media and cable news is the truth, Mr. Speaker. Regrettably, we have run out of time. We blew through this half hour. Again, I want to thank you for making time with all you have to deal with. It's like getting the President of the United States on the show. Your schedule is similar to his, actually. So thank you again, and I hope we can do this at some point in the future. In a Republican majority in Congress and in the White House.
Look, I would love that, but I love going out to Pennsylvania, seeing the American public, how hard you're working. To all your viewers and all your listeners, thank you for what you're doing. But also remember what Abraham Lincoln would tell us: believe in the exceptionalism of this country. There's no other countries conceived in liberty and dedicated the proposition that we're all equal. And we can continue to strive to make the next century ours. And the Pennsylvania people have a lot to do with making that happen. It doesn't matter what party you're in, we're all Americans, and we can all join together and make for the common good that the next century is the Americans.
Nothing to add to that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.